So that's just do it. Don't sit
Mm.
around and dream about it and think about it, plan it, do it.
Hi, and welcome to Lead Well. My guest today is Jeff Rasley, a lawyer who turned into adventurer, mountaineer, and author of over a dozen books. Wow, that's a lot. After leaving a successful legal and business career, Jeff, you began leading Himalayan treks and you discovered a life of meaning in service and adventure. So you're the president of the Basa Village Foundation, which partners with the small Nepali community of Basa to build schools, clinics, and sustainable co-ops. And you also lead a foundation supporting STEAM education back home in Indiana. Your journey is all about resilience, purpose, and joy. Welcome to this show, Jeff.
Good to be with you, especially after a bit of a struggle of us getting together. I'm glad we are together.
Jeff, you left a successful career in law and business. So, what made you trade the boardrooms for mountain trails?
Well, it started when I had turned 40. I was manifesting symptoms of a midlife crisis. And I already had a Harley Davidson motorcycle and a sports car convertible. So, that those bases were covered. But I came home one day from my law office and my wife slapped down on the table in front of me a brochure about trekking the Mount Everest Base Camp trail. And she said, "Why don't you go do this?" And so she was wisely telling her husband to go take a hike and do it on the other side of the world. And it was excellent advice because I had done a lot of adventure type travel when I was younger, but for a fair number of years there, I was very extremely busy. Law, a side business, two young kids. I was serving on, I think at that time, something like seven corporate boards. And just this life was so scheduled. And she realized I needed to get away from it all and to be able to do something where I was outdoors, feeling adventuresome, and could focus on something as simple as putting one foot in front of the other while at the same time enjoying this spectacular beauty of the Himalayas. So I did and fell in love with the mountains, which there aren't many of in Indiana,
Mm.
and really came to admire the people who live in the Himalayas. So I just kept going back, eventually started leading expeditions that I organized and connected with this little village and at their request raised money to help develop their village school, and that eventually led to organizing a 501c3 foundation, and the rest is history.
Wow, I can't imagine that going on such a trail. I did some crossing the Alps here, and that was already a huge adventure. So I can imagine with the Himalayas around you, that's a different story. And I remember that whenever I was on a trail, whenever I was walking there were really memorable moments that taught me a lot about life, about myself, about others. So, what were the moments, or was there a particular moment that taught you something that no office ever could?
Well, there are lots of moments like that. In high altitude trekking or mountain climbing, it's such a difficult, I mean, just physically challenging experience that you learn a bit about yourself in terms of your own resilience, grit, willingness to experience pain for the joy of standing on top of a mountain and seeing the spectacular scenery. And you also learn about teamwork because, especially when you're roped up on an actual climb, in a way, your life and the life of your team members are dependent on each other. But other than just, these beautiful experiences of the visual experience and also the lovely community of the villages, the thing that impressed me the very most early on was the local people who serve as guides, porters, cooks for our teams, and especially the what we call the Sirdar. The Sirdar is the chief guide of an expedition. And
Mm.
these men, and there are some women, but mostly men, are just sort of superhuman. Their physical ability to carry huge loads, their lovely kindness to look out for their clients and their team members, and their mastery of language. Most of the Sirdars that I know can speak at some, workable level of all the major European languages, plus Chinese. And in Nepal, there's 50 major ethnic tribal languages, and they're actually different languages, not, just variations. And then within each of those 50, there are dialects. So like the people in Basa are their tribal ethnic name is Rai, the Rai people. There are 11 different Rai dialects. And so Sirdar can move across the Himalayas, speak to at a workable level all the local languages, and communicate with clients from all over the world. And at the same time, they maintain just this lovely attitude of service in the
Mm.
sense of caring about, the people that they're working with.
Wow, so huge mental ability, huge physical ability, and then this humbleness of still being the servant. Wow,
Exactly.
that's
And
impressive.
so, experiencing that, it was very easy for me to want to give back to a village from which this one expedition that I did in 2006, all of the men in our crew came from Basa Village, the porters, the cook, the Sirdar, the climbing guide. And so when they asked if I would raise or contribute $5,000 to add a fourth and a fifth grade to their school, which only had grades 1 through 3. Of course, I accepted, and that was the first project that turned into the Basa Village Foundation.
Wow. Now, can you describe a bit more of what such a village looks like and what was the one thing or what were the things that struck you most when you got there?
Yeah, so the villages up in the middle and high Himalayas are subsistence farmers. A lot of the people will work in the tourist industry during the tourist seasons, which are spring and fall, because summer is monsoon and winter the snow is too high for most trails. But their livelihood is really subsistence farming. So they have these little farm patches, which often have little irrigation trenches around the little farming patch. The houses tend to be made of stone with colorful tin roofs of green or blue. Some of them have wooden or thatch roofs, and they're very pretty. I mean, they're, pretty little villages. Nobody locks their doors. Their windows are generally open except when it's, really cold. The traditional rye home has a fire pit in the middle, which has sacred stones around the fire pit, which indicate where people should sit. And one of the interesting projects we did, I mean, this is kind of a side note, but was to offer smokeless stoves to all of the homes in Basa Village. And something I was very worried about when the villagers, said they would like us to work with them for this project was if they started using these smokeless stoves, then what about their tradition of the fire pit and the sacred stones?
Mm.
And so one of the Sirdars, whose name was Booty, kind of chuckled when I said I was worried about that. And he said, well, for the people who put the stove on top of the fire pit, they know where the stones are, and so some of the villagers put the stove right on top of their fire pit, maintained the same tradition of where people were to sit. Other people put the stove over in the corner of the house, and the fire pit remained in the circle. So the wife, would cook on the stove, but then the family would move to sit around the fire pit for their meal.
Mm. Wow. Wow. And then I think there was a huge disaster there in an earthquake in 2015.
Yeah, there
Was it?
were the same year, there were two terrible
Mm.
earthquakes, which resulted in our largest fundraiser ever. Most of our fundraisers were, well, the water and the hydroelectric project were both about $25,000. And then we've had lesser fundraisers, but that one we raised, I think the total was $42,000
Mm.
to help rebuild the village. And on all of our projects, the villagers do all the work themselves. Like they built their own school, they built their own hydroelectric project, their water system, they rebuilt their homes, but because they don't really have money as subsistence farmers, so what they need from us is sometimes some engineering consulting help, but primarily money to buy materials.
Mm.
So we bought the stone to rebuild the houses, the cement, that kind of thing.
Mm. Wow. Wow. And how much were you involved in all that?
Well, in every project, my minimal involvement is to take the project to our board of directors, have our board review it, vet it, discuss it, and we usually go back and forth with. So we have a sister foundation in Nepal. The owner of the trekking outfitter company that I worked with back in '06, his name is Niru Rai. He started a foundation as a sister foundation with ours. And so the two foundations work together, and Neeru's Basa Village Foundation, Nepal, will come up with a budget and a work proposal and then submit it to us. But the initial request comes from the villagers. So
Mm.
Nero and I, when we first decided to do this together, we would not impose our views or values on the village, but the villagers would tell Niru, who comes from Basa, he lives in Kathmandu now, but he still has family, and his family lived for, you know, 50 generations probably
Mm.
in Basa. So he's very connected to the village. The villagers tell him and his team what they would like us to do. Then Nero and his team come up with a budget proposal, submit it to me. I go over it with our board. We go back and forth till we're satisfied. Then we do the fundraiser and then send the money over to the bank account for the Basa Foundation Nepal. The first several projects, I was there on the ground also, not really to do all that much work or supervise anything like that, but just to observe, and which is very, very, really fascinating. Like the hydroelectric project. So what the plan was is there's a stream, a mountain stream near the village, and there's a sheer rock cliff between the stream and the village, and then the village is a 20-minute walk beyond that cliff. And so we had to harness the gravity, the hydro power of that stream, and transfer it by wire up to the village and build a little turbine plant beside the stream, string the wire, hook them up to the houses, install the electrical contacts, etc. And so the way all of that was planned out was the village gathers, everyone in the village gets together and they just talk. And they talked for 2 days. And of course, at that point, I could understand a fair amount of Nepali. but the local language, I only knew a few words. So I didn't know what they were talking about. And sometimes they would get very excited. But what they had done by the end of 2 days is they had planned everything down to the finest details of what every single person in the village would do to contribute. And every single person, from the little kids to carry food to the workers, up through the guys who had to climb the sheer rock wall with the wire, electrical wire wound around their shoulders. That everything was planned out by just talking through it. And it was fascinating to see.
Wow. Wow. It kind of reminds me because I just recently went through a workshop that was called Dialogic Organization Development. And this is it. This is exactly it. They didn't need any manager. They didn't need anyone telling them what to do. They just figured it out and probably did it better than anyone else could do from the top because they knew what had to be done and who could do
Yeah.
what. Wow.
Yeah, I mean it that kind of consensus building process can take a long time as
Mm.
opposed to having someone who's in charge and who just issues orders. But the thing that was so important to Niru and me was that the village would truly own each of these projects. And it wouldn't be something where these do-gooders from the outside came in, did this thing
Mm.
for the villagers and then left, or stayed and ran it from outsiders. And so that is actually that principle is in our foundation, our bylaws and articles of incorporation. And we've followed that. And it's certainly kind of changed the way I look at how to do things because I mean I grew up and it was like you have a hierarchy
Yeah.
and it comes down from above, and to see how a truly grassroots organization works, it's beautiful.
Mm.
But the other thing is this isn't just like a group of friends who gotten together. These are people who, if you go up to a villager in Basa and say, hey, that woman over there, tell me about her, they will be able to tell you 5 generations back of
Wow.
every other person in the village. I mean, they've lived there for, they estimate, over 500 years, and it's basically the same families that have been there. So it's a very integrated, organic community.
Mm. And how big would such a village be?
There's about 350 people in the village. There's 67 families. And then there's a few families that live just kind of outside the
Mm.
village that, are kind of, sometimes they're in the village and sometimes they're not because they're animal herders as opposed to subsistence farmers.
Mm. Okay. And I think you mentioned that from all the books that you've written that there is also the 72 wisdoms that has a link to Basa Village, but also has a link to my topic, mental health. And it is, of course, full of life lessons, I guess, with 72 wisdoms. So, which one of those wisdoms means the most to you right now?
That's like when somebody says, so, okay, which of the books you've written is your favorite? It's always
Mm.
the last one,
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
last one. But so I don't remember what number of the 72 this one is, but it's something like live your life as if you are making a beautiful work of art. And my own quotes from my own books, I think, are maybe three of the 72. All the others come from other people, but I have to claim credit for that one.
Mm.
So I like that idea in terms of, just, very generalized advice to people. But I think, it's really important if you think of your life, everything you're doing as you're creating a work of art, as opposed to just, I have this task to do. I do this, I do that, I do this, just this sort of linear one after another things to accomplish as opposed to creating something beautiful. Anyway, I like, and I think people who try to live that way are better people and certainly more enjoyable people to be in community with.
Mm. Yeah, because to me, art also involves this sense of beauty. It's something good, it's something meaningful, and it's something beautiful to live. So
Yeah.
with all the adventures and the books and the foundations, what do you hope people remember about your journey?
Hmm. Well, a few of the books I've written are memoirs, and so I've tried to pass on what wisdom that I think I've gained. I don't think you gain wisdom by doing kind of, high adrenaline, adventuresome things. I think you do learn about your own abilities in doing things like that. But I feel like I've learned more in terms of wisdom and how to live a good life by just interacting with different people from different cultures and who see the world differently than the people I grew up with. And that creates a kind of a compassionate tolerance that you realize people are different. Not everybody is like you. And there's right and wrong. There are people who do bad things, and they should be held accountable for that. But at the same time, as you realize that you are not the measure of all things, it gives you I think, a more tolerant attitude towards getting along with people, being accepting of differences. And I think right now that's more important than it's been for a long time. And I hope you won't be offended if I just make a very brief political point, but I think right now we're in a really dangerous political era in the United States where intolerance is being advocated at the top and it's trickled down as opposed to tolerant, loving compassion, which is, you know, a much higher, better value than oppressive, tribalistic prejudice.
Mm. And the world needs people like, and I say us, to make sure that everyone hears that, because I totally agree with you. This is the only way to go. We cannot, we cannot survive on our own. We only can survive together as human beings. I'm absolutely convinced of that. Thanks for saying that. So,
Right on.
yeah, so for someone dreaming of a more adventurous and meaningful life, what is the very first small step that you would suggest?
I would, I mean, I like the Nike commercial of just do it. I mean, it sounds very, very, kind of superficial, but many times I would say to friends of mine, I'm going to do this trek or I'm going to do this, interesting travel experience. Do you want to join a group? And the response would be, "Oh, I can't." I said, "Well, why can't you?" "My wife won't let me," or "I can't leave the office." And said, I was really involved. I was the senior attorney in a small legal office and a senior partner in a real estate finance business. And I would leave for 4 weeks. And I would spend 8 to 12 weeks out of the office every year for years. And somehow the office managed to survive without me because I had a well organized office of people who cared about each other and who wanted to make the office succeed for all of us. And I had a wife who loved me and who recognized I had this need, and she honored it. And I honored the very same thing in her. She loved to go to England on her own and tour manor houses and museums and, the kind of the cultural sort of tour. And she'd go
Mm.
off on her own or go with a friend, and that's fine. So that's just do it. Don't sit
Mm.
around and dream about it and think about it, plan it, do it.
Wow, wonderful. Now, where can people find more from you, more about you, and more about the Basa Village project?
I have a website which is my full name, which is Jeffrey, Jeffrey, Rasley, Rasley. So there, I also have a what they call an author page on Amazon. So if you just go to Amazon and typed in my name, you'd find it both of those places.
Wonderful. And I'm sure people will go there because your life, your experience is so insightful. Thank you so much. And thank you for coming to this show. Thank you,
Well,
Jeff.
thank you, Christine, for having me, and thank you for your patience in working out our schedules.
Oh, absolutely. I'm all about inner peace, and if something is important, it will work out, and it has.
Yes, it has.
Thank you.
Lovely.
This was Lead Well. Now, what is the one thing that you're taking away from this episode? Please share in the comments below and do share the podcast with your friends and family, but only if you like it.